I'm here with Nataly Mualem, and as an immigrant and seasoned immigration attorney, Nataly has specialized in H-2Bs for years at this point. She also does employment-based immigration. She helps seasonal businesses in industries like hospitality, landscaping, and helps to bring in workers for these critical industries that often have significant labor shortages. And while also advising on in addition to the H2B space, she's also advising on H2As, E2s, EB1s, EB2NIW, EB3s, and others. She combines her personal insight as an immigrant with her legal expertise to deliver efficient and tailored solutions for employers all across not only the Midwest, but across the entire country. I'm really excited to be here with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time. This podcast is for immigration lawyers at every stage of their career, from students to seasoned practitioners. And so I'd love to kick off with a little bit more of your personal immigration journey and what led you to pursue law school and ultimately choose immigration as your practice area.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. As you said, I'm an immigrant myself, and that really shaped a lot of my story. I came here when I was 5 years old, moved straight to Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I live now. My parents at the time worried for their safety, honestly, back home in Syria, where we're from. And they, had to make some tough decisions and decided that, the best course for us was to move to the United States. So the way that they, decided to do that was they were like trying to just get us somewhere safe initially. So my mom and my sister and I moved to Canada. And my dad moved to the United States right away because he was the one in the greatest danger. He then, things didn't work out for us in Canada, so we all moved to the United States, and I've been here since 1997. We had a very long and very sordid immigration history. My father applied initially for an I-140 through work, and he also filed for asylum. And those cases did not go as planned, partly because of bad legal advice and partly because of the political climate in the early 2000s as well. So he had a very long immigration history. And by the time that his situation was sorted out, I had aged out of it. So, I was left,
Oh,
yes, yes. So this was, I was in high school, basically, going into college. I didn't have status. At the time, I didn't have many options, and the war in Syria had broken out. So I was able to file under TPS, and I had TPS for quite a few years. And also at the time, DACA was introduced. So I filed for DACA as well. And really, it was my entire experience in college and law school was really shaped by being an immigrant and being in this kind of limbo status because my EAD would consistently expire with TPS. I was having trouble renewing it. Everything would take a long time. So there were a lot of internships and a lot of opportunities, even within law school, like being a TA and being an RA and all these things that I had to basically sit out of because of my status. So it really affected, my outlook on how much immigration matters and how much advice matters that you give to clients. And, don't always look for the short-term solution, but think about them and their families in the long term. Because there were quite a few things that could have, looking back, like hindsight's 2020, but quite a few things that could have changed how things could be. I ended up meeting my husband while I was in law school, and at the time he didn't have papers either. He had TPS, but shortly before we got married,
where is he from?
he's from Syria as well. But he was a more
Amazing.
recent immigrant, yes. So when I met my husband, he was on TPS as well. But he had just recently, arrived to the United States. He didn't have any negative history, nothing like that. And he was in residency at the time, and basically based on his, he had done a lot of research, worked really hard, basically contributing to cardiology and cardiology research at the time. So we kind of talked about it, and I had like casually suggested NIW, so which is the national interest waiver. So he went through that route, and he got his green card, and then after we got married, I petitioned through him, but obviously he was only a permanent resident, so that route was quite a long journey as well. But I was really, really excited. The first time I finally had my EAD, and I was able to, after, I mean, it had been interrupted for quite a bit. So I was really excited, after law school to just jump right in and start working. And thankfully, I haven't had many issues since with that, but it's, definitely shaped the way I look at things, and why I'm always, I think, with clients, anytime they have children, I always consider their ages. I consider, what's next for them. We look at different alternatives. Maybe one path is a little bit longer, but it helps your kids, basically have safe grounding themselves when they're aged out as well. So there's quite a bit of I think my background that like seeps into my work every day, and I hope for the better, that it makes me advocate better. I think part of it, also makes me more nervous to do certain types of immigration, and which is probably why I stick more with employment based. But I definitely think that it really seeps into, all facets of my career.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's such an inspiring story. I know a lot of immigration lawyers, and I have met a few who were previously on DACA,
Yes.
and some who are still on DACA, and they are some of the most inspiring and empathetic immigration lawyers that I have ever met. And I'm sure you bring that into every single facet of your work, and I'm sure it makes your clients feel that for sure. They feel that this is your lived experience, and that you know what it's like to go through the stress of immigration and the legal limbo of a status like DACA or TPS. And I'm sure it makes you an even better immigration lawyer. And it's and going through all the different status, you can connect, I'm sure, with many of your clients and say, "Oh, I've been on that status before,"
Exactly.
or I've been petitioned through that eligibility category, etc.
For sure, for sure. And the funny thing is, like, when I went into law school, I've always wanted to be a lawyer. So, I have something that I published on LinkedIn a few months ago, and back when I graduated, I published it on my Facebook. But there was a journal from when I was in third grade talking about how my dream is to be a lawyer. And, obviously at the time, like,
Wow.
oh, yeah, it's very funny, like the way that a third grader thinks. But I was like, I'm good at arguing with my sister. I want to help people. I read a lot, so I think I should be a lawyer. And I had my only two options at the time were Harvard and Yale, apparently. So
Nice. I like it.
so definitely, I've always wanted to be a lawyer. I graduated high school at a time of the legal bubble. So all my parents' friends that were attorneys, and especially my dad had a lot of attorney friends. They're all like, "Don't do it. There's not you're not going to find a job. It's so difficult." And a lot of them were in the public sector, which looking
Hmm.
back, I understand why that is. So they kind of advised against it, and I think I wanted a more safe path. So my bachelor's degree is in chemistry, and
Mm.
it's a chemistry major with a biology minor. And then I went on and I got a master's degree in molecular genetics, thinking that I'm going to go into a science field, and really thought about dentistry seriously, and took the DATs, and, was
And
about
so many people with that background too, they end up in patent law.
Exactly. So I had gone into law school thinking I'm going to be a patent attorney. And especially with the gene patents at the time, they were very big. But my first year of law school, the case, and I forgot the full name of the case, but it was regarding the BRCA breast cancer gene. So that case had come out basically saying you can't patent genes, and I found it very difficult to find jobs that were biology and chemistry, and more where they were like chemical engineering, or some sort of engineering background that was required for most law firms. And I found that I'm not as interested in like the technical details as much as like big picture too. So I enjoyed IP in general, but with patent law, it was a lot more like technical than the way that I think my mind works, which is more big picture, in general. I mean, I like looking at details, but I'm more like strategic planning, long-term thinking, big picture person in general. So I, graduated having no intention to do immigration. I was interested in helping with immigration, like maybe doing some pro bono work, but I had no intention of being an immigration attorney. And when I applied for my first job, I was at a mid-sized law firm that had 23 attorneys. Two of them at the time were immigration attorneys, but I was hired for the school law group. What ended up happening is like in my free time, because I had a background in immigration, they didn't have to explain to me what an I-130 was or what an I-140 was or that
You're like,
investor.
I filed that. I filed that.
Yeah, exactly. So like I just had the general background. So I was getting pulled into these cases and had a lot of experience. And I think that was a really good experience for me overall because they did a little bit of everything. So they were not specialized in any particular type of immigration. It was a very general immigration firm. They did family, they did business, they did, a little bit of asylum here and then, like more affirmative. But I basically got exposed to a lot of immigration. And then my husband was applying for fellowship at the time, and he was placed in Tampa. So we moved to Tampa, and naturally, I didn't want to take another bar because I knew I was going to be there for 3 years. So I started doing some contract work for other immigration law firms and immigration practices, and basically gained more experience for about a year. And then I was hired at an H-2B firm. So they did H-2A and H-2. H-2B being the larger part of that. It was a very large volume firm. We did hundreds and hundreds of H-2 cases a year, and processed thousands of workers. And I quickly, I think, really acclimated to the program. I really enjoyed it. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed working on the H-2 visas. So that became, obviously my primary practice, and I became H-2B department head. And then later on, partner at that firm, until I left last year and opened up the Mualem Firm. And since, I would say about 80% of my practice is H-2B, and then 20% of kind of a modge podge of everything else that I enjoy, that you've listed earlier.
That's amazing. And, having worked in this industry for almost a decade, I appreciate all the focus areas that folks have. And I'm sure you have people in your network that, they're like, oh, you're a lawyer. You do all kinds of law. You do family law. You do business law. You do whatever else it is. But the truth is, lawyers specialize in a certain vertical, whether it's family or criminal or immigration. But then what so many people don't appreciate is they might specialize even within that specific vertical, and they might specialize even further. And I think it makes a lot of sense, having worked and seen what some of the biggest corporate immigration firms do and how they work internally. There are lawyers that not only specialize in immigrant visa or non-immigrant visa, but they might specialize in a very specific part of that. Maybe they are focused on perm. Maybe they are focused on, L1s. And in your case, I'm sure, nearly everything there is to know about H-2Bs. And that is, it's pretty powerful counter positioning as you're building your firm, because then if people want the best H-2B help in the country, they're going to go to you. So this is actually my first time interviewing an immigration attorney who's primarily focused on H-2Bs. So I'm really excited
We're
for
in the
our
minority
discussion today.
for sure.
And I'd love to, I think there's a great segue. Tell me about some of the trends and headlines that we're seeing happening within the H-2B space this year.
Sure. So, I mean, there's the common trend of not enough visas, right? That's always been the case with H-2B. There's a limit of 66,000 visas a year. They're in two visa pools, one of them in the beginning of the fiscal year in October, and then the second one that's released in April. As always, those visas are not enough. What's happened over the past, several years now is there's been a supplemental cap, so like a bonus round of visas. The strange thing that happened this year is that The way that the supplemental cap is allotted, we have to wait for it to be announced to be closed. And then after it's closed, we can start using the supplemental visas. This year, there was a large delay or a long delay, I'm sorry, in announcing that the cap has closed. So we waited for about almost 3 weeks before we found out, and everybody kind of knew that it had closed because we stopped receiving receipts. But we didn't get an official announcement for a few weeks, leaving everybody on edge of, will the supplemental visas be happening or not happening? And obviously, that was very difficult for everybody as they're trying to forecast their workers' arrival. And we did end up delayed. I usually have most of my workers here by mid-April, and here we are now, middle of May, and still processing the last few cases. Thankfully, most of our workers are here, but we still have a few cases where we had to wait for the supplemental release. The other big change this year, and this actually preceded this administration. It was done, kind of in the 11th hour of the Biden administration, but there was new rules introduced for H-2A and H-2B, and actually the H program in general, but I'll focus on H-2B now. Some of them are largely positive. So, for example, when a worker ends their contract, they were given more time to port into another job, which allows, more flexibility for employers and employees. There were also rules that eliminated the country list. So that means technically any country is now eligible for the H-2B program. So you can bring in people from any country, although we haven't really tested that out yet because we don't know how the different consulates are going to react to this new program. New to them, I should say. And then there's also changes that are positive in that they allow for people to reset their 3 year, once they've been here on the H-2B program for 3 years, they have to leave, and that went down from 90 days to 60 days. So those two changes have been positive, and obviously the portability has been a big thing where, as long as you file, that worker can work with you right away without having to file premium processing and wait for a result. So that saved employers fees and obviously made it more efficient as well. But on the other side, there's been more emphasis on past violators. So what we're seeing is more and more RFEs, or notices of intent to deny, on cases. And I haven't seen this personally because none of my clients were thankfully in that category, but other attorneys have shared, on AILA, and we've been, keeping track of it, where there's, past violators are kind of like in a sense blacklisted from the program, and sometimes it's very minor violations, things that
Yeah,
are.
what does it mean to be a violator?
So, I mean, that's kind of the question here, because you could technically, I mean, when they come and do an audit, we've seen violations as small as the way that what's written on your pay stubs, for example, the way that, maybe you don't have your FEIN on your pay stub is a violation technically. But it could be
So they
something.
can they can say whatever they want is a violation?
Well, there's a list. I mean, it's not whatever they want, but usually there was kind of an understanding of minor versus major violations, and the idea of yes, maybe you shouldn't have done this, but we'll just kind of give you a little citation until you fix it next time, and it doesn't result in anything. But then there's obviously like violations that I do think employers should be barred from. I mean, if we have people that are mistreating their workers, or not adhering to the contracts in major ways. Obviously, that's different, but what we're seeing is more of these RFEs and notices of intent to deny for some of the more minor infractions. So that's been a concerning trend, and the NALP actually has sued the administration, and it was the previous administration technically, over this. And the last I had heard is, we were getting close to a default judgment, but I don't have honestly the latest update on that. They're still in court regarding that, but there has been a lot of pushback, I would say, generally about that part of the new rules, the modernization rules. But obviously, we want to keep the more flexibility that was allowed as well.
Super interesting. And I know that there are specific industries that maybe are closer to this administration than the previous administration. I know that the H-2B cap was increased in the first Trump administration because of some lobbying efforts from the agricultural industry. What are some of those things that you're anticipating that are going to change? And I mean, like, we're looking at the price of eggs right now, which I know a lot is because of the avian flu, but I'm guessing labor shortages are also a huge part of that. And so, how do you see the administration moving forward in their approach to this program? Because that's interesting that there's some litigation that is extending from the last admin to this one.
Exactly. So, I mean, I will clarify a few things, and I think, I think this is kind of the interesting thing about the H-2B program is, there's both parties don't like it for different reasons, and this is something that's totally anecdotal. I don't have any proof of it, but this is my 2 cents. Anytime we have a Republican president, I feel like the DOL is a little bit easier to deal with when it comes to H-2Bs. And, we like, for example, this year I've had less notices of deficiency than last year. And even though the cases, like some of the cases are basically identical, but then USCIS is a lot more difficult to deal with when it's a Republican administration. And we've had
That's interesting.
and I think, part of that too comes back to, traditionally, the Democratic Party did not love H-2B because the unions don't like H-2B too much. And, that's kind of changed and they've softened on that a little bit. When I was at my previous firm, we represented a lot of companies that had a union presence. And we would need to obviously get an agreement from the union to allow these H-2B workers to join the union. And, they have to agree to the prevailing wages. And it was a different process than the traditional prevailing wage that relies on the survey. And we got more and more buy-in from unions as time went on, because I think they realized too that there is a labor shortage. But I've seen publications out there that just allege things that aren't true. They say that this is a way to undercut wages while the government gives us what wages to pay. They say that the living conditions are awful for H-2B employees, but most of the time that's that's not the case, and the employers are always for H-2B specifically, the living quarters are always they always have to be optional. So if you show up, you don't like it, you don't have to take it. You don't have to use it. They can't retaliate against you and fire you because you're not using their optional housing. I've toured some of that housing. I've been in that housing. I've seen, live footage of housing as we're getting, cases set up. And in most of my experience, at least the clients I've dealt with, that's not the case. So, I mean, there's definitely some of that happening where, there's a narrative against H-2B from that perspective of, the workers are abused. They're not being treated fairly. This is undercutting American wages. But then on the other side, you have, the Republican Party used to be a big advocate for H-2B. And now as we're kind of going more towards the, I would say, conservative branch of the Republican Party, because I think, like Republicans in general, I mean, it's a wide array of views, and some of them, don't really push against these programs, but I think more of what I would call the more recent MAGA Republicans perhaps, there's been just any immigration is bad immigration, so there's been more of a push against H-2B, and I think that's why everybody was so fearful when the supplemental cap wasn't announced, because we were worried that this is, a discretionary action that they're deciding against so that we don't have access to H-2B visas. And I think everybody's a little bit less confident that there'll be supplemental caps in the next couple of years. Even though, like you stated, in the first administration, we did have a supplemental cap. It was rolled out very differently, but we did have a supplemental cap for 4 years.
And it's interesting because Trump and his businesses, obviously, they understand the H-2B program.
They use it.
If you run golf courses, if you run, a big company within tourism, you are likely using these programs. And many folks, what was that?
Trump does use H-2B. He actually has
Yeah,
applications for H.
continually, he still does to this
Yes, he
day.
still
Yeah.
does.
So he understands the program, and many of the MAGA Republicans across the country understand the program. But then it's almost translating that to the base that doesn't run businesses, that doesn't have to deal with labor shortages, that doesn't have to deal with these challenges, and helping them understand that it's good for America. And I guess because that is their base, they're willing to take on that challenge, and they're maybe less willing to take on that challenge in other areas like the H-1B or like you know, the parole program or some of these other areas that similarly help with labor shortages across the country or help with making America more competitive. But because it's not within their base, then it's not a category that they care as much about.
Well, and I think with H2Bs and H2As, the kind of short-term effect of not having the workers there is more easily felt by the average American too. The average American isn't feeling the crunch if somebody that's working on, as a software engineer isn't there, right? Like it's going to trickle down in a few years when we don't have that technology we would have otherwise, obviously. But it's not that immediate impact of, prices at the grocery store are up or construction prices are up or, we can't find anybody to do landscaping, so those prices are up. Because that's, I think, with H2B and H2A, it's almost an immediate impact that we feel. So, when COVID happened and they suspended the program for a while, I mean, that was immediate. We saw what happened to construction. We saw what happened to lumber prices. We saw right away what happened to grocery prices. I think that's a little bit different when we're talking about H-1Bs and like the EB-1 programs or NIWs or these types of programs like the O-1s even, where, yes, these people are magnificent to have in our country, but it takes a while and it's more of a collective effort to feel their impact than, just not having one person there is not going to affect your phone tomorrow. If the engineer working on your phone isn't here, or the group isn't here this year, you're not going to know it probably for 3-4 years that you're behind. So I think that's kind of the difference too. And with H2Bs, particularly because there's a cap, unlike H2A, I think it's a moving target. Like, and I think if we don't, really address it, on an annual basis, or at least make changes that make it possible on an annual basis to have an increase, everybody's going to feel that impact very soon. And I mean, think about the prices of construction and what's happening to home prices across the United States. Imagine adding on to that now, we're not going to have a workforce. I mean, I don't see that happening. And I think that, like you said, most people that are even voting for Republican, for the Republican candidates, whether it's Trump or somebody else down the road, they understand that, and it's easier to feel than saying, my son is a computer engineer, but somebody else from India is taking his job. I mean, that's a harder narrative to have than saying, or sorry, that's an easier narrative to have than to say, well, if we don't allow farmers to come in and pick these fruits, I'm going to go do it. You know what I mean? It's a little bit of a different kind of narrative there, and I think there's a kind of a realization that there is a labor shortage that isn't going away. And I think the other kind of interesting thing that's been happening with H2B is more and more sectors have been using it. So, kind of traditionally it was used by landscapers, by hospitality, and, obviously some of the row fishermen and things like that. And then we're seeing more and more industries enter it as well. So we're seeing, for example, meat processors are now entering H2B, pest control. I've done 4 nanny cases this year where it's people in their individual household that need a nanny, and we're filing for H2B. So it's also making it more competitive in that way. And in addition to that, the quota was set back in 1990. So, imagine all the new jobs that exist now that didn't exist in the 90s. So maybe people that were going to be landscapers back in 1990, now they have 50 other options, working in IT or working in AI or working in all these other sectors that just simply did not exist. So, the quota is very, very outdated. And I think most, research has said that we need about 500,000, or sorry, 250,000 visas a year, and we have 66,000. So you can see it's like a huge
Wow.
discrepancy. So there's definitely room for growth of the program, and I mean, part of the blame's on Congress. I mean, they can just increase the quota and bypass this kind of political limbo that we're in every year with the H-2B visa program. And if they just increase the cap, or they allowed maybe employers to be exempt from the cap for several years, that would work. But right now, really, the only tools we have are in-country transfers. So, somebody's here, they're already doing work, and we're transferring them. And usually there's, that's limited because there's a really high retention rate with H-2B. Then the other option that we have is you bring in somebody in October, you send them back home, and then you bring them back here in April because it's counted as the same fiscal year, which is great. And I do that a lot for my clients, and it really, like, that strategic planning sets us apart, but at the same time, it's added expenses, and not every client can afford it. The larger ones, it's no problem for them, pay a few extra $1,000 in the fall and have a little bit more assurance. But I mean, I deal with clients as small as a couple $100,000 a year total income, so they can't afford that, and I don't suggest it for clients that are that small. So I mean, I think change needs to happen, in Congress, and then also, the change needs to happen. Like you said, there's a lot of advocacy going on, but unfortunately, the way that the advocacy has been rolling out and working is, it just goes back to the administration. And, some administrations are obviously going to be more susceptible to those arguments because it serves their base. And I mean, I think we can take a lot of the politics out of it if Congress just acted and revisited the program and really saw that I mean, it's just not sufficient for the needs of America in 2025. And it's just,
This this program, it's such a clear example of why immigration is good for America. And you saying that it is expanded across industries and has been growing over the last couple of years, it's so clear that there is a labor shortage, and the labor shortages are increasing across some of these critical industries. And so more and more industries and more companies are relying on the H-2B and H-2A program. And it's because they can't get American workers to do it. And why is that? Like, I can see it anecdotally. I'm from Utah, live in New York City today, but in Utah, it is a mecca for pest control. And I remember just 10 years ago, so many people were working in pest control, whether they were actually the technicians spraying the solutions at houses, or they were doing the pest control sales, door-to-door sales. And many of those people that I knew were doing pest control, they have diversified, and they are now in other industries. They have gone to coding boot camps. They have done other things. And it makes sense if you look at the macro level. I'm sure many people in many of these industries decided that they wanted to have a better career, whether that's desk work, whether it's a job with PTO, whatever it is, and so they specialized, and America as a whole has specialized, and we are working in service industries and manufacturing and some of these other areas. We rely on outsourcing, or we import labor to come and do these critical industries. And I think if you talk to folks in Congress, if you talk to Trump, they understand that. But it's hard to translate that to a coherent message that gets people to rally behind you and accept the challenges that they have in their day-to-day life, or the macro challenges that we have as a country that are not due to immigration. They're due to other things.
well, and I'll say also,
Um,
like, there's definitely, I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I'll also say there's, and this is, I deal a lot with landscaping companies. Like, that's probably like my biggest client base within H2B. And what I hear all the time is, we have somebody, they do a good job, they learn how to do it, And then what stops them? I mean, the barrier to entry for a lot of these careers is very low. What stops them from opening up their own company? And then instead of making $20 an hour, they can make, $200,000 a year.
That's the other thing I was going to say. Yeah, maybe you either went to a coding boot camp or you've started your own business,
Exactly.
and now you cannot find laborers, and so you have to rely on the H-2B program.
Exactly, exactly. And that happens with construction, happens with landscaping. I hear it all the time of like our best guys. I mean, it's not anything against the company. They're doing a great job doing everything they're supposed to do, but their best guys learn how to do it and then they go off on their own. And I mean, look at us. Like we do that as attorneys too. We learn the skills and then, after a while, you don't want to be somebody else's employee and you go off on your own. And it doesn't speak negatively.
And that's good for America, and it's good for Americans. Would you rather be a business owner
Exactly.
who employs immigrants and does outsourcing, or would you rather be the laborer? Like
Exactly.
it's very obvious.
Exactly. And I think, the difference is you're not going to have that opportunity if you're not an American. And that's why a lot of times, we have companies that have to do the H-2B program. They're not doing anything, they're not trying to get labor for cheaper than they would have otherwise. They're not trying to, skirt by, not providing livable wages or doing all these things that are claimed. They just cannot find workers that will stay because there are opportunities that come with being an American. And, that's part of doing business is you're kind of raising the next generation of business owners by having them work with you. So yeah, I mean, definitely, I think there's a lot of potential with this program, and I've said, like there's more and more industries entering into it, and more people applying just even within industry. So there's been an 8% increase just last year over for the spring visas. There was an 8% increase of applicants, which is huge given how
Wow.
saturated the program already is.
So, shifting gears a little bit to talk about the specifics of processing within your practice,
Sure.
we're seeing a lot of last minute changes from USCIS in the Trump administration, like a recent overnight form update where Ayla sued and won. I know that was a few weeks ago. How does your firm handle these kinds of seemingly small changes that can lead to big disruptions? And how are you managing your specific workflows in cases like that?
Sure. So, I mean, honestly, we're a small firm. Every moment matters. We don't have a huge team, but we have a very skilled team. So the best thing I've found is really like, and I didn't used to do this, like I'll be the first to admit, but I start off every day, reading updates. I go on USCIS website. I look at ALA all the time. And I really try to stay, updated. I think with the specific change you're talking about, it was so abrupt that there was really nothing that any practitioner could do to avoid it. But some of the more, nuanced changes, I definitely try to stay updated with ALA. And I think the other really nice thing is I've kind of built a community around myself with other H-2B attorneys and other attorneys in general that do employment-based immigration, and then kind of the larger immigration attorney group as in general. And we kind of all talk. We talk about trends. We talk about what's happening, and especially with H-2B, I mean, we're such a minority. I've met so many people that do almost every other case type except this. So we're such a minority. So anytime I see somebody that does H-2B, I try to connect with them and chat so that we have a sounding board that we can talk with each other. And more importantly, honestly, just within the immigration attorney sphere in general, like just keeping each other updated. And I think Ayla has been great. Some of the Facebook groups have been great. Some of the WhatsApp groups have been great, where you can just ask, like, has anybody, encountered this? Has this happened? Any recent trends? And usually I think this is kind of the unique thing about immigration attorneys is we are rarely against each other. We don't have that sort of adversarial nature to us that you would if you're in like real estate law or litigation or something like that, because it's always kind of like a win for me is a win for the next practitioner and vice versa. So we kind of, I think, all are very open to sharing resources and sharing information and knowledge. And, obviously we compete for cases, but we're not competing for good standing on these cases. So, I'm more than happy to help somebody else get a notice of deficiency approved because, obviously that's going to trigger down to me eventually and vice versa. So me and my clients and, in general, I think we all work together very collaboratively.
In immigration, it's like we're playing blackjack, and we're all going against the dealer, and the dealer's the government. And other areas of immigration, maybe they're playing poker.
That's a really good analogy.
Did I say immigration? Other areas of the law,
Law, yes.
yeah, real estate. You're right because they're transacting across one another. Or I can't imagine like things like insurance defense. Those conversations got to be heated. I just watched Landman, the show, and they some of those it's very dramatized, but the lawyer conversations around some lawsuits are very heated.
I have
So
little kids, so we just watch Bluey in this house, but
nice. I have heard Bluey's very good, and I've heard it's very good for adults too. It's one of those shows made for both kids and adults.
That's
So
a good
I don't
show.
have kids yet, just one puppy, but eventually I guess I'll watch
Put
Bluey
on
once I
Bluey
have
for your
kids.
puppy. You might enjoy it.
Okay. So there's only so much that lawyers can do when it comes to disruptions that the government creates. So one question I ask everyone on the podcast is, let's put government delays aside. What, in your opinion, is the biggest internal barrier that slows down a case from start to finish?
Sure. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of, I think training of staff. I would love to have a better way to efficiently train staff members. That's always kind of the limiting factor, I think, in at least my practice areas has always been that's the limiting factor of, basically having enough trained staff members that are there and being able to do the work. That's kind of a problem again going back to labor shortages and all of that that I think we experience even in this arena. And then I would say the other factor would be some of the just systems, basically having very efficient systems. So we're I think sometimes as attorneys we kind of put our carriage before our horse and we grow very rapidly before we develop systems. And that's something I've been trying to be mindful of this year as I started my own firm and, really kind of having the systems in place to support the growth before we grow to a point that, it's difficult to keep up with, and basically we don't want to be reactive. We want to be more proactive in general.
What's one efficiency initiative, like a new technology process or organizational change that you've implemented at your firm that really stuck and made a big difference for caseflow management?
Sure. So I recently started using a program called Case Status. It basically creates a portal for clients. They log in and they're able to see exactly where their case is at and the progress on their case. For each stage there's an initiative for them, so whether that is sign certain forms or send us certain documents or maybe start recruiting. It gives them the exact initiative and it tells them what the steps are, how long the anticipated time is to be in this stage. And I think overall it's been very positive. The other way we use it is we track our workers as well. So we send, hundreds of workers to the consulate a year, and it's hard for the companies to know what's happening with these workers because what usually happens is we have a team that handles, the worker processing because most of them are in Mexico and speak Spanish, and then we have the employers being handled by our US based team. So what we've done is created, through that portal, a way for each company to track exactly where their workers are and, make sure that they have everything that they need. They'll know, kind of expected travel time, when they're going to be at the consulate, when they hear back, and all of that's going to be in one place. And I think that's been a major change. We just started rolling it out, but it's already been very, very well received by our clients because it's the updates at the tip of their fingers anytime they need it.
That's cool, and that's a good plug for Lawfully Pro because I know that and when it comes to we like the folks at Case Status, and it's very much aligned with what we're doing at Lawfully Pro of keeping your clients, both the employers and the individual foreign nationals, in the know. And Case Status and other solutions like it, Hona and others, they're focused on the lawyer stage and when you're doing processing work, but then there's this post-submission stage, which is such a big black box for folks, and it's hard to get insight. And so that's what we do at Lawfully Pro, is we zoom into the different government stages, especially post-submission USCIS, and we help folks be way more in the know when it comes to government processing, about how long it should take and what they should expect. So one fun one to end it: if you could snap your fingers and create a brand new technology tool to improve your case efficiency, what would it be?
Sure. That's a big one. I think I would create something really similar to what you have at Lawfully, but more geared towards my line of work, where, as we are processing workers and, the employees, that we would have a very easy way of tracking the progress, because right now all of that's done manually, and it's a lot of back and forth that's done by our team. So I would love for us to have a way to better track that and to be able to kind of have our pulse, at exactly what's happening without all the manual updates that we're having to consistently do on hundreds of people at a time.
Dang, our product and engineering team, I'm sure they're gonna listen to this and they're
Yes,
gonna
please.
get on it. We gotta figure out all the H2B, all the consulate stuff, get it all incorporated into Lawfully Pro.
Yes,
Well,
please.
thank you so much for taking the time. This has been such a lovely conversation. Tell the audience how they can find you and the best way to reach out.
Sure. So the best way to reach out is through my website, www.mualemfirm.com. There's a contact us portal there. And if anybody, would like to get information on H2B cases for your clients, or, want to maybe work together on any cases, there's definitely a way to do that through our website. And once you submit an inquiry, we'll be back in touch with you very shortly.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.